think we're all here. So all of council is seated, and this is our City Council study session, Monday, 21st, 2019. And we have two agenda items on our study session tonight. And the first is our EEF Audit Review Informational Meeting. Our City Council is reviewing the EEF Forensic Accounting Report, and our representatives from Eide Bailly are here to answer questions along with our Director, Maria Sabato. If you want to kick us off.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. As the Mayor mentioned, Kim Higgins, the partner, and Doug Cash, who actually performed the audit, are here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the audit. So I'll turn it over to them.
Good evening. You have to have those on, and they have to be quite close to make it really strong for the listener at home.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kim Higgins, and we have the report that was issued on September the 27th of 2019 that was issued to the city and EEF, and if you have questions, we're ready to answer those, take you through the report, whatever your pleasure.
Council, would you like to start out with questions? Are there any questions? Do you want to walk through quickly some of the major findings then? Or Councilmember Cuesta, you certainly can kick us off if you'd like.
Beginning with the summary would be nice if we
Okay,
can.
great.
Thank you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Doug Cash. I'm a senior manager with Eide Bailly and one of the forensic accountants that was involved in this. You have to forgive me, this is kind of a new platform for me. I don't normally get called back to talk to people in regards to that, so this is going to be a little different. So please forgive me if I stumble through part of this, so ask away in reference to this. We were asked to look at the EEF invoices and documentation, CAMs and things like that. And as you'll see in the report, we documented just exactly how many invoices we looked at in regards to credits and payments. What we looked at was every available invoice and documentation from 2011 forward. Due to record retention requirements, most of the others, I believe, had been destroyed. We were told we were able to have everything we did. The city, Maria's group, provided all the assistance that we needed in regards to that. We found that there was a large amount of money that went particularly to two specific vendors, if you will, in regards to that with no contracts. It's documented in the report that a total of over $9 million was paid out to vendors over this time frame. That's the entire amount over the amount of review. And in the work papers, we can go over specific numbers if you wished. I know that there's one area that we talked about that people had concerns about was the amount of money spent in regarding to snow removal. That was broken out separate, and information was obtained from the National Weather Association about snow and how much was done. Now, whether it took 2 or 3 days to remove that snow or anything else, we don't know. Obviously, you weren't here. But it was broken down into how much monthly and all those transactions and how much to see was there in regards to also no contracts going through with that up until April of 2019 when new contracts were issued through the city. So you have to forgive me. I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for. If there's a specific area you'd like to talk about, please let me know. We'll delve into it more thoroughly.
Thank you. Anything further? All right, council members, this is our time to ask questions, get further information. Member Barentine.
So in December of 2015, when I asked for the financials for the Englewood Environmental Foundation, that was a Monday evening during a study session. The very next day, the city manager came back and said that there were 4 things that concerned him. And he was so concerned about them that he turned them over to the district attorney. And that was that there were companies that were paid that no longer existed, companies double paid, companies that overcharged, and companies that double charged. Do you believe that your audit answered those 4 questions that the city manager voiced in 2015?
Councilmember, I believe probably the only question it doesn't answer is whether they are still in existence now. I have to admit, we did not check in to see whether they were still in business at this date. Okay. So that may be the only question it does not answer.
And could you give me the answer to those 4 then?
I'm sorry, could you go back through them again? in
There were
reference-
companies that were overpaid, there were companies that were double paid, and there were companies that were paid for work that was not done according to the city manager at that time.
Okay.
As a point of information, can you specify the companies, just so that I can follow along too, so that you can be clear on which companies you're confirming or not confirming were double paid, et cetera? Thank you.
Were you asking just only from Eide Bailly for that
Well, I
information?
guess, Councilmember Barentine, do you know the names of the 4 companies, just so that I know that for sure that he's confirming or not confirming the companies you're stating?
The city manager at that time, although that meeting is recorded and I've gone back over that, never said which companies he believed were paid and no longer existed, were double paid, were overpaid, or were paid for work that weren't done. What he said is he identified those along with the assistant city manager, Murphy Robinson, and it is the reason that they turned it over to the district attorney. That's what caused all the problem. Council didn't turn it over to the district attorney. So that's what I'm asking, is since that started this whole thing, rather than just going through and at that time doing bids, RFPs, and making sure that we had contracts, it got turned over to the district attorney for a long, arduous wait and then just raised more issues. So I'm asking whether you think that since that was the catalyst for this entire problem, whether you believe that you were able to answer those questions.
Councilmember,
Do we have
everything,
another point of, do you have another point of clarification?
Thank you, Mayor. When Eide Bailly started the work,
Yes.
you met with all council members and several members of staff and asked, as I recall from my interview, specific questions, lots of questions, and asked for anything we thought might be relevant for your investigation over the next few months. Now, several months have transpired from your work began, and so now, here at this moment, I'm wondering, were these 4 questions not offered beforehand to have been included in the investigation? It sounds like now, at the very end, we're summarizing, and now we're getting 4 questions anew, seemingly anew, that you could have prepared. And then I don't know, I mean, if all 7 members of council felt that there was one catalyst and that the cited catalyst for the beginning of this is what Member Barentine is saying.
Member Wink, I think that, let him answer. I think that what she's asking for
Was it
should
covered?
be uncovered, and if not, he can say.
Is that true?
I can answer your question. That's exactly what I told
Thank
him
you,
during my
Mayor.
interview, is I explained that, exactly what I've just said here. My interview wasn't really that long. I know what the catalyst was for the questions that concerned the public and this council and why it got turned over to the DA. So I asked those during my.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mayor
great.
Olson.
Thank you. And can we
Does she
keep
want a
going? Can we let him
clarification?
answer? Okay, great.
Sure.
okay, everything that we documented in the report, you will see had an invoice that went with it. Whether they were overpaid, that is not a decision that's for me to make. All my decision is to say that this is what they were paid. Was it in response to a contract? Did it meet city requirements and those kind of things is my understanding of what we were asked to do. We did sit down and speak with the district attorney's office and at the very beginning of this, went over their report with them and discussed with them in reference to what they had found and their decision of what they moved forward was their decision. They did ask that at some point.
Would you remind the public, if you can, what that decision was?
They said at that point there was nothing that they could do with it. There was nothing they could move forward with criminally.
Okay.
At that point. But they did ask that if the city council wished for them to get a copy of this report, that they would like to read it to see if that would, change anything that they had decided. So that would be up to the council to do that. I did not provide a copy to them. In reference to double billing, the invoices, if there was an invoice to it, in regards to it appeared to be a legitimate invoice, it was considered paid. Now, whether they were paid twice, in regards to that, we did not go through every single line of every invoice and break it down that way. We went to the total cost of the business. The time consuming it would have taken to break every single invoice down would have been extremely high, and we were trying to get this done as quickly and under budget as possible for you folks. I hope that answered all 4 questions.
Well, and then my follow-up would only be, originally when we did this, because what the district attorney's report, and the reason it caused so much trouble with the public, was it came back and said, we can't move forward because we can't get a warrant from a judge because it's past the statute of limitations.
That's very possible, yes, ma'am.
Well, that's what it states.
Right.
Not that they determined that nothing illegal had happened, but it was a moot point because if they did, they would be unable to get an order from a judge because the city was aware of what was going on in 2012 and did nothing about it. So that started the statute of limitations as far as the district attorney's was considered. When we hired you, it was my understanding that during the interview process that you believed that you could go all the way back to the beginning. I'm confused at why it was only 2011, because that's not what we were told.
Councilmember, we went back, a forensic exam, as we discussed in our thing, is a little different. It's difficult for me to tell you that the numbers that are recorded prior to that were recorded correctly without having documentation to verify it. It's not normally our position to verify or put something into writing that we can't prove it, that the numbers came from somewhere in regards to that. So we took as much as we could find and be able to do that to provide that information to you. So the numbers prior to that, I can't say whether they're right or wrong because I don't have any way to verify them, and I'm not going to testify or say something's right or wrong without being able to verify a number. So we took everything we possibly could, and the report is based on everything we could get.
Is there any reason during the interview process that you seemed pretty confident that you'd be able to access all that information, that it was available? Is there some reason that at that time that you thought it was available?
We weren't sure exactly what the, how much documentation was going to be in storage. No one seemed to have an exact listing of all that. Once the city and we began digging into it, we found out that most of the prior documents had already been destroyed under record retention, and we were given what they had.
And we mentioned that in the interview process from a standpoint of telling you that we could look at 100% of the information that was available. And at that point in time, what we were told is that all of that information was available. But obviously, if it's been destroyed under record retention, that was not available for us to look at. So we went back as far as we could from a standpoint of record retentions laws and what you actually had available to be able to put our hands on, to be able to look, to review, to verify, to understand that that source documentation was available to be able to report to you on.
I've listened to your interview several times, and I believe that you acted in good faith.
Yes.
And I believe that at that time that you were told that the information was available and that
Yes.
you would be given access. What happened after we hired you and that it limited it only to 2011, I suppose,
Yes.
is what it is. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll let Councilmember Sierra speak in a minute, but I heard very clearly during that meeting that you would take all the materials that were available to you, and of course, I think you did make it clear that if it wasn't available, you couldn't analyze anything that isn't available. So I appreciate the work that you've done. Councilmember Sierra.
Thank you. Regarding work paper 6 and work paper 7, and these are going to be, I believe, you know, at the very end of the slide deck, if anybody's following along. But this is specific, I believe, for Engle's service. The description always seems to be snow plowed. Do we happen to know if they had any other type of description other than snow plowed for any of their invoices, or was this more of a catch-all?
It appears to have been a catch-all, sir. We documented exactly what it said.
Okay. I guess this is more of a question for Director Sabata. And I know that this will be hard to state, but basically I'm trying to figure out, obviously snow plowing is one aspect of a contract that we have for CAM. Would any type of prep work in advance of a storm be also considered something as part of the contract? So if we have to lay down salt in preparation for a snowfall, is that something that we would ask of anybody that's maintaining our streets?
So I'm not certain it's a great question for me to answer. However, Maria DeAndre is here, and I believe that might be a better question to ask Director DeAndre if she can join us at the table.
Director DeAndra, would you be willing to come on up? You might have to bring your own chair. I think one was taken.
So in response to the question about prep work, not so much prep work, but after the fact, we do have, and I will be providing through a council request, copies of invoices that show snow hauling instead of snow plowing. And so because the site is very limited for snow storage, especially like up here in the garage, the upper level, and then around the circle out front, they will usually plow the snow, and then they'll come back a few days later and then haul it down to the service center. So those invoices do show snow hauling after the fact versus snow plowing in the days when there's snow falling.
Is that part of the current contract, or is that part of previous contracts that we had?
That was always the intent for the previous contractor as well.
Okay,
Just
but-
because of limited storage on site.
And we did get invoices that had snow hauling as part of the
Correct.
description?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll provide those via the council request.
Councilmember Barrington has a clarifying question.
I believe what Councilmember Sierra asked was that part of the previous contract? We didn't have a previous contract.
We did from like 2008 was the last one we had. And it was, I don't know if it was specifically listed in there as another service, but it was always intended because we have such little room for snow storage.
The open records request that went for any contracts with Angle Services, I didn't believe ever got answered. It was my understanding the first time we ever had a contract was April of this year.
No, I was able to locate I believe it was 2008 for snow plowing.
And when were you able to locate that?
Oh, when we were going through the process to, look for put together, when we were asked, basically.
Was that provided to Eide Bailly, because it just got done saying that there were no records that they could really confirm or use prior to 2011?
I don't know if contracts were asked for, but we would have provided that if that was asked for.
Right, thank you. Councilman, or Mayor Pro Tem Russell. And then
So, Ms. Higgins, were you asked for contracts? Did you ask for contracts?
Absolutely, we asked for contracts.
Okay, so then I would like to know why those weren't turned over. So,
Could be because they didn't have anything to do with 2011. I'm not quite sure.
okay.
We provided all information that was asked for.
All right. Continue.
Is the lack of deposited items problematic? I mean, it says, I believe on page 5, that you didn't have access to all the due to the lack of deposited items, we were unable to verify if transaction descriptions were accurately recorded in the accounting records.
Basically, the deposit items just shows what makes up the deposit. We went, as long as the deposit slip matched what went into the bank, that we didn't feel that we needed to go back and verify every dollar that went into that deposit, as long as the total deposit was verified into the bank. So that's why we did not ask for them.
Okay.
It also would have been very costly to the city to get those, I'm sure.
Okay. And I thought from those very first meetings that we had is that the city told you there were like 6,500 transactions. Or am I not remembering that correctly?
I believe that number was what was based on in regards to the amount of information, and that number came up with potential vendors. And that information, it was more of a calculation, I believe. But when we actually got into the documentation, we went through them page by page. And to look through that, what you have is what we were able to find and verify as invoices coming in.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Are there others that haven't spoken yet? Do you have anything to ask at this point? No? Okay, Councilmember Barrington.
And this is more for, I think in the end, we ended up with a lot less than what we had kind of bargained for, or at least what we believed we were going to get. But I have two questions. One, what is the total amount that we got billed?
$50,000.
Okay.
Right in that realm, yes, ma'am.
So for a kind of performance audit, and several statements are made in there that you're not really looking for illegal stuff, that's fine. You only went from 2011. But we did get quite a bit of information out of that. For our director, As of, and it's very unfortunate that considering this whole thing really got escalated by our previous city manager making the comments that he did, and then saying, doing a new process for procurement that was not followed for the entire time he was here, that we didn't start doing that until this spring. But we are now requiring contracts and bids to go out for all of both EAF and EMRF. Is that correct? And that policies, you have a policy and it's in place and you guys are following it for the boards when you're in that position?
Yes, I can confirm, as a member of the board, that we went through the bid process for multiple services here on site and made a selection and issued a contract for those services.
Okay. And Angle Services didn't, wasn't up in there for just maintenance, just for two of the items. You've got a not-to-exceed contract for $133,000. Just going through 2018, just for those two, if they are correctly listed, we're saving about $93,000 just for those two services based on that contract. So I appreciate that you guys have cleared up the problem, and obviously, I think it would be a stretch for anybody to say we weren't overpaying, and $93,000 just for those two over the course of 20 years, a couple $1 million easy. A couple $100,000 here, $100,000 there adds up to some real cash after 20 years. So I appreciate that you've changed it. Is there a possibility that you might be able to go ahead and at least give us some information on your bid process and your procurement process and your contract process and how much you think that that might be saving us? I would greatly appreciate that for the future. Thanks.
Would you like to answer to that at all? It doesn't, if you
No,
don't,
I
that's fine.
appreciate the information. I would just ask if the council would like that to be a request that we forward through email or a formal council request. We do have the information available.
Is it easy to put together? Yeah.
Yes.
Make it,
I have most of it with me
Councilmember
today.
Quest is next.
To that note, there's 8 areas of concern that are outlined, I believe, if I've tallied those up correctly. How is staff addressing those now that we've got those in front of us in the areas that were identified? I think that a couple may have been already, but is staff overlooking this and responding accordingly?
So, in our opinion, it is really up to City Council to determine, based on the report, how they would like to use the information to go further. I mean, we have done what we could prior to the audit being done, and that is to put those contracts in place for the facility. But based on the information that's in this report, we would be looking for guidance from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Thank you. I also, it suggested in here that we would have written policies and processes in place so that EAF employees knew that. So is that, have we worked on that at all, or that's one of the things you're waiting for direction from council?
At this point, the board is using the policy set forth for the city of Englewood. So we're using the bidding and the practices that we set forth in the spring that the city council approved.
And then just one other question, and that is about the, we were always, according to the bylaws, EAF was not, the directors were not supposed to be paid. But there is information in the budgets, especially in the last 2017, 2018 budgets, about EAF salaries. So,
If I can explain.
Go ahead.
So I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, however, there is a portion of an individual that works within Public Works that supports the facility, and also on the finance staff, a very small portion of the finance manager's salary is actually paid for by EAF. However, those are the only individuals, to my knowledge, that are paid for by EAF. There are no directors being paid. And the amount was previously provided in communication to council. It'd be easy to dig it back up, but it wasn't very large, to be perfectly honest. It wasn't a large amount.
thank you. So I have one question for Ms. Higgins and Mr. Cash. So are the city's policies sufficient for for the EAF policies? Meaning that, what I understand that Director Sabata said was that EAF is now using the city's policies. Is that okay to do that, or should EAF have separate policies for their operations?
Yes, it's perfectly okay as far as the analysis of the policies. From a standpoint of overarching, we see that happen quite often with organizations that fit under the umbrella of a city or a county, the overarching policies of that entity, which usually go through quite a bit of scrutiny from your external auditors. You would have any sort of management letter points or findings type of points that would need to be strengthened at the city level, would be happening from that standpoint and could be utilized by EAF. Just from a standpoint of going through that external audit process, I would think that your external auditors will be looking at that as well to make sure that whatever has been noticed or documented in the board minutes of EAF would be talking about the fact that you have adopted those overarching policies of the city. So there is documentation to indicate that that's what you're doing for EAF, so that there are policies, there are contracts in place, there are all of those procurement, there's all of those things that the city uses that will trickle down and be used by EAF, and that is perfectly acceptable.
Okay, thank you. And then, is what you did for us, the audit, is it a forensic audit or was it a performance audit? I mean, what I saw in the report is different somewhat than what I expected. So can you explain to me, is this a forensic audit?
Yes, ma'am, it is. This is a forensic audit, as we discussed in our interview, doesn't sample. We go through everything that's available and we break it down and provide that information back to you. And if you will allow me, on the end of on page 20, you'll notice a comment there in regards to the information being right now. There are times that additional information is found later on that is corresponded to this. This gives us the ability to go back in and update or revise anything on behalf of this report in case new information is found or additional work wishes to be done. But this is a forensic audit. This is based on fraud examination techniques and determining whether, either it did take place or it didn't take place.
So if more information comes forward in the future and it's something that can be dealt with, would you open that up again, or the city council would have to do that, or?
We're still under contract with you folks, and until you decide that contract is done, we can go back and do anything additional within the budget that we've provided to you at any time. Until the city tells us we're done, we're not, we're done, but we're not done.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Right?
Thank you. We have now spent the money on this. There is information, especially these 8 areas of concern. It has been put into council's hands now, and I appreciate the guidance on that, Director, that you're looking for some sort of action from council. I would wonder if we can get staff to look at these 8 concerns and say, is there a policy within the current Englewood guidelines that addresses it? Some of them are very broad, the concerns, and some are as simple as who is holding the stamp with a name on it. Do I expect that our policies get that minute in terms of where the stamp's held? I wouldn't expect so, but I think that the onus is now on council just to verify that all these things have been addressed. And I don't want to make that request simply on my behalf, but could we have staff look at these 8 areas of concern, see if they are addressed in the current policies, and then if not, maybe council can work to get those rectified?
Certainly, I'll treat that as a council request, and we can provide that, the documentation and the overview.
I would assume that everyone would be in agreement with that that's a good way to head forward. Thanks for the great suggestion, Member Cuesta. Councilmember Barentine, were you finished? Okay, Councilmember Barentine.
I think the point that the Mayor Pro Tem made was good, just making sure that the areas of concern that you brought up, and it is top of the list who's got the little signature stamp. That matters the most. So those kind of things are very important. That's how money can, carrots get dangled and things that's not appropriate. So you want to have process and procedure in place. Do you think that our current, hopefully not to repeat it, but do you think that our current city policy would adequately cover the concerns that you have if they were to follow that? Because that's exactly what they were, Frank Gregowitz, our CFO at the time, had written those policies up at the time, the ones that he'd done, and they refused to. They said there were only suggestions for them. So I'm just trying to make sure that city policies that we do now would be sufficient to cover the areas of concern that you have. And I think you said kind of in general, and if you haven't looked at our city policy enough to really, have matched those two, that's fine. It's just a good question.
If you don't mind, being a forensic accountant, I look at things a little differently. And in regards to part of the, some of these minute things like the stamp, that is on the fraud world is a very real possibility that things can do that. So we look at things a little more detailed sometimes than auditors do in that regards. But I absolutely believe that as long as what we call the tone of the top is set by you folks and you demand accountability for the people to your policies and procedures and they follow those, I believe that they will take care of whatever issues that you have, as long as they are followed and they are, held accountable to those. So yes, ma'am, I do believe that.
And I would agree with you. I do believe we have people in place now that are concerned about that and certainly would not want to violate a process and procedure and openness and transparency. As when you were interviewed, immediately when you said when there is no contract, when there are no bids, when there are no RFPs, it already puts it into the forensic audit arena, and that's a concern. I have every reason to believe, while I may have disagreed with the previous city manager on a lot of issues, he had every reason to be concerned and was from the beginning of his employment with us, even before I came on council, trying to change this and addressed it and seemed to be somewhat helpless in doing that until he got some backup with it and turned it over to the DA. So I believe we have that now, and I would like to see these implemented, and I'm sure we're going to have a meeting on how to make sure that what our policies are being followed by that board, and maybe their bylaws come into line so that we can make sure that that's going to be us doing that piece of it. Obviously, we're not going to get away from the concern that people in this audience here have material that was given to them by the city that was prior to 2011. Whether we're able to go ahead and try and move on and have the leadership to try and move on from this or not, I don't know whether that's going to happen. I don't know if this cleared it up as much as I would have liked, because I thought it was going to be from the beginning. But I do appreciate the work that you did, and thanks for answering my questions.
Yes, ma'am. One last thing, if you allow me. Thank you very much for allowing us to assist the city in regards to this. I do believe wholeheartedly that we provided the best information to you that we could give you, with the documentation and stuff was available to us. And if there's anything else that we can assist you on regarding this, please let us know.
There are several others that haven't spoken yet tonight. Do you have anything further that you would like to ask? I have a few things to say, and maybe this form of questions too. We did very strongly want a procedural sort of analysis of the whole thing, and so in this, I saw some great recommendations. I think many of them we already do. Are there any that you feel are still sort of in that, you might want to work a little harder on this?
I have a difficult time answering that, Mayor, because we haven't gone back and redone everything.
Okay.
To go back and re-interview people and things. We do that for some groups. Sometimes we come back in a year or two later just to do interviews to see whether those current policies and procedures are actually being followed, kind of thing. Everything that was based on was at the time of the exam and interview. If the changes and stuff have been made, I haven't spoken to anybody, Ben.
Okay. And then is it possible to find out who you interviewed, or were they somewhat confidential for them?
It's in the report.
I mean, yes, it's, I was thinking of some people that aren't in here. That means you didn't probably interview them.
If they're not in the report, we do
Okay.
not speak with them.
That's a dumb question, thank you.
We did reach out to a few people. They did not wish
They
to
didn't
speak to us, so
respond.
they were not there. I mean, that was
Maybe-
not in the information.
That's the question of asking you, did so-and-so not respond? If they're not there, they didn't respond. Okay,
That is-
that's helpful.
Yes, ma'am.
The last thing is, I mean, we can say what we want about a former city manager or not, and I'm not sure what air we get out of that. I think what I remember from that happening is that the city manager really truly did not want to be the one investigating this, nor did he want any of our staff directors to have to be put in that position. And so when it was turned over to the court, I think it was a very wise decision. And when it came back the way it did, with there is nothing really pointing to any criminal investigation here, that was what we were told. Now, the fact that some other council members found out that there was more behind that took us 6-7 months to find that out as well. But I think this began to take on a life of its own that was unfortunate and made it really difficult to actually manage this whole EVE thing. And I am very thankful for the work that you've done, and that it's put us on another ground of hopefully having our directors that are responsible now feel as though you have the backing of council and the policies that you need. And so I guess I would like to turn the question from us and council back to the directors to say, what else do you need direction from us on in a way that we can make sure you feel as though your professional integrity and ethics are not going to be questioned by citizens? And I think that's where it came to, where all of us voted, yes, let's just do this and get it over with and get it behind us and get whatever we need to do to change in process so that we don't have to keep going through this. So I don't know if the EVE has met. I haven't looked at the last meeting to see if there was anything that they wanted to do in interim, I mean, not interim, acting, actually, our deputy city manager tonight.
Right. I would say that all of the activities of EVE are recorded and documented, the meetings. I mean, that's publicly available, happy to share that, and I think that does document that we're following the policies, and we'll clarify those if there are any policies that we need some additional documentation on. But I appreciate council's support for the new procurement policy, as Ms. Sabata pointed out earlier in the spring, which has really clarified what we're doing, and happy to have someone verify that we're following that to the letter.
The last thing would be if there are some documents that somehow did not get transferred to you in terms of the 2008 stuff that Director DeAndre has suggested, how much would that cost to have us get that to you, put it in, and have that acknowledged in this document so we can move on?
Mayor, we're well within the budget to do that kind of stuff. The contracts we would have the contracts, we could document them, but we could not document if they were followed because we don't have any documentation for invoices up until 2011. So even if they have them for 2008 or 9, we don't have anything to verify that they were followed because we don't have any invoices back then.
Right, because invoices were shredded probably
Correct.
at that point in the
But
system.
at least to be able to look at
Yeah.
those contracts for 2008, 2009, whatever there might be, if there were extensions on those contracts perhaps that might be in the board minutes that could extend to 2011 or 2012, if that documentation were available to us, that would at least supply an opportunity to say there was a contract that existed. At this point in time, we don't have any contracts that we believe existed during the time that we looked. So if there was a 2008 contract, a 2009 contract, to provide that to us, to allow us to review that, to look to see if it might have been something that could have been reviewed or accepted in 9, 10, 11, that would provide us with more documentation than we currently have at the moment.
Okay,
So
great.
I would-
Thank you. I'm fine with moving forward if others are as well. Let's take a couple, Member Quest is next, and then I think Member Barentine. Let's just take a couple minutes each,
Thank you.
and then Councilmember Sierra is last.
Several times now we've referenced that documents are not available prior to 2011. So we are going back to 2018, and we've got 8 years worth of records. Is that standard, the years of records we have? What is the policy typically on how long we hold records before they're destroyed?
I would have to verify that. Typically, it's 7 years for written.
So we'd be even past that 7 years with if we go back to 11.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Point of
Member Barentine?
information.
Yeah.
Would you answer that question, Mr. Cash, about is that standard?
The 7 years is standard, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And while we're at it, Director Hargrove, is that our standard practice from your time here too?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. I think it's Member Barentine. No, and then.
My question was actually asked.
Okay. And you're done, right? Your light's still on. All right. Member Barentine.
Whether that's our standard procedure or not, the problem is that we have people present today that, including myself, that got information during this period of time within that 7-year period that went way back a lot farther. And now they're going to ask, why did it all of a sudden not be available? So we have core requests out there where people were given information prior, all the way back.
Point of order.
Prior to that.
Councilmember Barentine, what are the documents that you're talking about, and could you produce those for them? I don't know why we wouldn't just send them.
Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't have just sent them, considering at the time that you were interviewed, we believed that you had access to all of those, so it wouldn't have occurred to anybody that all of a sudden it got cut off at 2011 until we got the report. So, but we have to have some real conversation. Hopefully I can do that with the community on to what end and what purpose that's going to create. So but that's part of the conundrum here, is that we're being told that it was 7 years, and people actually were given documents within the last couple of years that predated 2011. So we're going to try to have some conversations about whether it's worthwhile, what we would find out to go further back to do any of this, and what the benefit of maybe moving forward. I have confidence in the people we have now, and I've already seen almost $100,000 savings with just one contract, so we might be in some good ground. But I appreciate the work that you did. Thanks.
Director Sabata.
So if I can just address that question, I believe the information that is available for 7 years is the detailed supporting document, the paper copies. I think when we were talking in terms of what was available, it is the financials. Now, I can't speak to the items that you may have seen, and that's what's challenging for me. I certainly can go back and ask now that the audit is done at your pleasure and see, and make it part of the council request when we're showing the responses to this. I'd be happy to do that, just so that we be perfectly clear about what information was available back to the beginning, which is more than likely the financials related to the organization. We're talking about detailed documents that are typically destroyed after a 7-year period.
Director Jandra, could you also address?
Yeah, so just as an example, we have a lot of documentation from like the various stuff related to when Cinderella City was turned over to the city, all those types of documents, land documents, those types of agreements, we have all that documentation as well. So I think it's the financial information that doesn't go back further than 2011.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I am very thankful for the work that you've done, and I hope we just don't keep dragging this on. It becomes sort of a feasting. I sure hope that if any council member is sitting on information, that we're not withholding that from the city. You don't need to ask any citizens to give it up, but I would certainly hope that if any of you had Corrid and got stuff yourself, that you'd turn it over, because if there's more there, we should know, not start this conversation that could be unhelpful. Yes, and if you know of some and you have documents in your possession, please, it would be great if they had them. So thank you very much for the work that you've done. I really think that you've helped us get beyond this and see that, we actually have some good things in place with this, and there are some procedures and policies we're actually going before we brought you on, which I'm very thankful for, but it's good to see the confirmation and to see where there's some areas that we might want to follow up on.
And as we've said, if you would like us to proceed with any other documentation that we've talked about tonight, please just access us, provide that to us, and I'm sure the contracts will come over and we'll be looking at those.
Yeah, I think that's the main one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do think the process of having staff respond to findings is a good process to put in place so that you have that documented and you have those policies that exist from a standpoint. That's a normal process that we see in going through any sort of finding management letter type of recommendations, is that that staff responds, and staff responds with who's going to correct the situation, the date that it will be corrected, so that the accountability to council is there and is public information and very transparent, and that if you want us to come back in and follow up on that within a 3-month period, a 6-month period, a year-long period, to make sure that those things are in place, that you can allow us to do that, and that would be documented.
Thank you. I think that helps me with one last closing thing then, and if you're not in agreement with me, let me know. But one would be, this is open conversation for staff now to enter into, now that they have all this, to say, you know what, there may have been some things missing, or maybe some misinformation that we can then get back into this final document. That would be one. And then secondly, that the staff directors could go through, and the directors of EAF, to document exactly as you've said. What's been done, where do we have some points yet where you need clarification from council on how you want us to move forward? And I think this is easy to probably address on each one of them. Yeah, looking like it.
I'm comfortable with the approach you set forth.
Okay,
It's
great.
clear. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank
And
you,
we'll
appreciate you
see-
having us. And if any other questions come up, please feel free to contact us.
Thank you, and thank your staff that worked with you. We know it wasn't just two of you. You had a lot of other people on this. Appreciate their persistence.
Yes. She's an internal audit person, and this was a forensics audit, so we, yeah.
Thank you. This was all done by my staff. From the forensic audit. Thank you. That's good confirmation that it was a forensic audit. Thanks. The next one up, the next item is employee health benefits. We have good information here, new stuff, but here is Deputy City Manager Dorothy Hargrove to present where we are with our health options for the city.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I'm here in my role as acting interim, whatever, director of HR. I've learned a lot of the details of our benefits and wanted to share that as supporting documentation for the budget, where the amount for employee health benefits is included. Just given the time, I'm going to abbreviate some of my comments. You know, I think it's important that you recognize that the city, based on your comments as well, understands that employee health benefits are an essential tool for attracting and retaining really talented employees. So we make it a priority to provide decent health benefits that are also fiscally sustainable and in line with what the city can provide. And I think the package that we have worked on with Kaiser meets both of those overarching needs, the needs of our employees and the needs of the citizens in the city to manage our resources effectively. The reason for this information coming to you on the 21st of October, where we're well into the budget season, is because our initial response from Cigna, our current insurance carrier, indicated that they would have to raise our insurance rates, 26, 24%. That would have been unsustainable. And so we reached out with the help of our insurance consultant and talked to several other carriers. That resulted in long negotiations, going back and forth. I will say that Cigna was able to come down a lot on their initial increase. They worked very closely with us. We also reached out to United Healthcare. They were very responsive and very eager to help us. Kaiser also came in with a bid to provide benefits, and ultimately looking at the differences both in the plans that they offered to our employees and the cost to the city, Kaiser is the very best option, and that was the one that was chosen. The arrangement with Kaiser is actually fairly unusual. They will provide us a 3-year guarantee with a 6% increase in year 2 and an up to 7% increase in year 3. They also provided a $650,000 credit to be split over 3 years, which will reduce the city's costs substantially in each of the next 3 years. And those were very attractive. Also very attractive and included in great detail and fine print in your packet is what the employee benefits look like. we are still able to provide a high deductible but very generous package to our employees at no cost, which is really quite remarkable. We have a lower deductible plan, the $500 deductible, that will cost more, and for some employees and their families, that's a better choice. And Kaiser was also, I think, really creative in providing a third tier of options, which will allow our employees to choose a doctor or services, at least the second two of 3 tiers, out of the Kaiser network. It gets a little complicated, but it does provide for the flexibility for our employees who would like to choose to continue with their own doctor, to continue a choice of treatment. And so that flexibility to have that option, if the employee should so choose, was also very attractive going forward. Our attachments, provide, all the numbers for you there. Basically, if we had stayed with Cigna and their final offer, it would have cost us, over the space of this contract, or 3 years, over $1 million more for the city than if we decided to go with Kaiser. I will say, you do not have a contract in front of you. We're working on that because all of this is still just at the agreement, we're moving forward stage. So we hope to come back to council with something more definitive, and are working on that package soon. But the information on how our healthcare dollars are being spent, why we chose to go with Kaiser, are all included here, and I hope answer questions and provide you the backup information that you need.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. Have the employees been given some of this information?
Yes, ma'am.
And so they're okay with this?
Well, I'm sure not everyone is happy.
Well,
That's
right, but-
inevitable. But we have provided the information. Kaiser has come out. We've had, I think, 10 different employee meetings. Kaiser has been very generous in answering questions in person and by phone. Many of the questions have to do with a transition of care, and I think they've got a dedicated person who's helping us with those transition questions. So I think overall people are pleased.
Right.
There were many employees who were on Kaiser. We were with Kaiser for I think 12 years before we moved to Cigna 2 years ago, and I think there were many employees who felt that was a good experience and were pleased at the change. But again, that's not 100%.
Right. Well, and I appreciate you reaching out to the employees, though. and- Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sierra.
When I was looking over this information, one of the things that caught my attention was when you look at the high deductible health plan on the very last page, I was kind of surprised to see that per employee it's actually more expensive than any of the other 2 options. So then when I scrolled up an extra page, then I kind of realized why. Is it normal for municipalities to pick up the entire cost of a high deductible health plan instead of the other options?
You mean with the $2,800 plan?
Yeah, the $2,800 plan. So that one is at 0 cost to the employees, including the family, and if it's an employee and a child. But if you look at all the other options, the $500 plan or the POS plan, each of those does require a contribution by the employee, but not the high deductible health plan. So is that normal at the municipal level?
I would be out of my territory to say that that's normal or not. I will say that the structure of this plan, if you look at the last of your 3 attachments, you will, is that true? Is that in this attachment? Or thank you, it is, thank you. The city's portion, what we're paying per employee, is very similar between the 3 plans. The city is paying for a single employee under the $500 deductible, $500 a month. For the $2,800, it's $539. We are paying a little bit more, but not dramatically more. And then for the POS plans, the city, for 1 employee, is paying $500 a month. So that contribution by the city to each employee is very consistent and we think fair for our employees.
Right. No, I understand that. I think my first question would be just understanding whether or not it is normal for a municipality to pick up the entire cost of a health plan, in this case, the the $2,800 option. And then secondly, just brings up, if the answer is yes, then we'll lay it to rest. But if the question is, or the answer is no, then maybe we want to dig a little bit deeper onto why we're offering a $0 option. So that's more where I'm going with it. And, you know, I'm happy with the entire savings overall, but that did catch my attention when I was looking
Sure.
over the information.
I think it's the way it's structured that we're able to do that.
Right.
But I can certainly look into that information and see.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councilmember Barentine.
Could you give me the effect that it's going to have on the budget now that you've got something that's more of a contract here?
So the good news is, we didn't work in silos. We were working very closely with HR as we worked through this. This was a unique situation for me, that we're putting together a budget at the same time we're trying to talk to different vendors. And I think I did come forth and tell you, you know, at certain points we're making changes based on assumptions. So although the decision had not been made, the numbers that we put in the budget reflect the Kaiser number. The thing that they came forward with was a credit as well, that was just mentioned, $650,000 credit that can be used over 3 years, but we aren't required to take it in year one. So there are a lot of variables in health benefits too. I want to explain that because we have not been through enrollment yet. We're about to go into enrollment. So based on these numbers, enrollment might change. So that credit gives us the wiggle room. I'm very comfortable with the budget that was approved in the first reading and hopefully will be approved tonight. It reflects the numbers that are here for Kaiser. So it shouldn't
So it
affect the budget.
reflects them and less, possibly less?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay,
less.
and then we'll go through that as the year goes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
But you're comfortable leaving it?
Yes, and
It's
I'm
not
very
gonna be
excited that
insane.
we have an opportunity to know what our numbers are going into next year and the third year, to be perfectly honest. That was a big win for
All right.
us, and budget stability.
And then how will we be making the decision after you get the enrollment of whether you want to take, how much of that credit you want to take in each of the 3 years, or whether you want to do it all up front?
You know, I don't know that we've discussed that just yet, quite frankly, but it will obviously be a staff decision that we can bring forward. The good news is that credit will be carried forward into the fund balance, so it's not like we're going to be using it for anything else except
Right.
it'll be savings going forward. So it'll be part of the fund balance.
Great, thank you. Appreciate all of your work on this. We need to get next door, unless there's something pressing on this. We'll be seeing this come back as a resolution. I'm really excited. I know that, Dorothy, you've been working on this quite a bit, and the payoff, I think, is really good. And I have heard from a lot of people in the city that they like that they're going back to Kaiser. I'm a Kaiser user, and I was very suspicious when we first used it, but I like it now too. So I'm glad to see that. Let's adjourn this meeting. We'll meet next door at 7 o'clock, which is actually in a minute. That clock is even further off. As soon as we can. If you need to take a little bio break, go ahead. I swear that gets behind 1 minute every night. Oh.